Be inspired, supported, and empowered. This is the Global Healthy Living Foundation podcast network.
Welcome to The Health Advocates, a podcast that breaks down major health news of the week to help you make sense of it all. Our goal is to help you understand what's happening in the healthcare world to help you make informed decisions to live your best life. I'm Zoe Rothblatt, Director of Community Outreach at Global Healthy Living Foundation. And today I have a special guest co-host, my colleague Adam Kegley, who's the Associate Director of Global Partnerships at GHLF. Hey Adam, how's it going?
Hey Zoe, it's great. Thank you so much for having me. It is wonderful to be here.
And you're here today to talk about a special program we have focused on the LGBTQ plus and IBD population. We're also joined by another very special guest, Dr. Carlton Thomas, a gastroenterologist in San Diego, California. Hi, Dr. Carlton. Thanks for joining us today on The Health Advocates. Could you begin by introducing yourself to our audience?
Well, hi, and thank you for having me today. I'm Dr. Carlton Thomas. I go by Dr. Carlton on Instagram and TikTok. I am known as the butt stuff and queer health guy on social media.
That's awesome. And Adam, is that how you found Dr. Carlton on Instagram?
I did indeed. I've been following him for a while now, and since we started this new program, I thought, hey, 1 + 1 = 2. So I'm really glad to have you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and I'm a Mayo Clinic trained GI doctor, and my subspecialty training while I was there was in inflammatory bowel diseases with Dr. William Sanborn, who's one of the world's leading GI experts. I was the one fellow at Mayo Clinic doing talks on our required rotational talks about gut health, about the importance of sex and gut health and gay, bi, and queer men that nobody at Mayo would ever talk about. So I rose a lot of eyebrows even back then because I thought it was important to get that information out there. I was drawn to GI in particular because I know that so many people from very young ages to very old ages can get gastrointestinal illnesses, especially inflammatory bowel diseases strike people at such a young age and can be very frustrating. Of course, there's quite a variability in the way it presents, from very mild disease to incredibly painful, debilitating, multiple hospitalizations, multiple surgeries, that kind of thing. So I just wanted to try to help people. When the pandemic hit, I kind of needed an outlet for my stress relief and anxiety. So I started a TikTok page talking initially about butt stuff, because people don't talk about butt stuff. It's a taboo subject. And I thought, who better to talk about it than someone who professionally knows the way around a butt, but also personally, So I put that together on TikTok, and it just instantly, almost overnight, 50,000 new followers just talking about that stuff.
That's amazing.
Pretty incredible. And 3/4 of the people who initially followed me were women. So, butt stuff doesn't have a gender, doesn't have a sexuality, doesn't have a femme or masculine role to it. It's everybody's got a butt. So why not talk about it?
And can you talk about, you mentioned some of the reactions that you got at Mayo Clinic when you started to have these conversations. Did you see a similar reaction when you brought that conversation publicly online, or was it really different? What sort of response did you get from the community?
Well, again, this is probably 20 years later. Initially, there was that subsection of people who were like, how dare you talk about this kind of thing on an app made for children? And, initially I was almost going to delete my app because I thought, oh, this isn't worth it. And then I said, you know what, I'm just going to block these people and keep going. And I'm glad I did, because a lot of people all around the world have gotten a lot of the information that they need to have a better life since that time. I branched out to the queer health side of things because I thought it was also lacking in representation on social media. And a lot of people don't know about queer health and why it's important and what's different about it and how much stuff is missed because people don't ask the right questions, or how many concerns are skipped over because the providers don't ask the right questions. So branched out to Instagram and kind of tailored my Instagram more towards the queer health side of things.
I think that's so incredible. And I'm just so glad to have you here with us today, Dr. Carlton, to discuss these things, of course. And I think not only because these issues, health equity in general, are very important to me, but also to GHLF. And I think Zoe mentioned it a bit at the top of the episode, but I really wanted to share a little bit more about the program that we're doing that focuses on the unique challenges faced by the LGBTQ plus community, particularly those living with IBD, like Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. And we've actually launched the LGBTQ plus IBD Experiences Survey to better understand patients' experiences, to confront healthcare disparities in IBD care, and just to establish better inclusivity in healthcare settings in general. And we're really hoping to use the survey results to better inform and educate the LGBTQ plus community in general, but especially those living with IBD, as well as healthcare providers. And our goal is really to help ensure LGBTQ plus people with IBD receive better access to care and improve condition management. So, with that in mind, and in line with what you'd previously said, I want to know what you see as some of the unique challenges faced by LGBTQ plus individuals living with IBD. Whether it's something related to diagnosis or access to care or treatment.
Yeah, there's a lot that happens with the queer community and IBD and the challenges that come around that. Not everybody lives in a place that is easy to talk about their sexuality, even in the United States. If you live in small town Alabama, it's probably going to be harder to talk to your primary care doctor about anal sex than it is if you live in somewhere like San Francisco or New York. Between religious discrimination and homophobia, there's a lot of challenging stuff happening. There's a huge lack of knowledge on the provider side. There is a lack of information and obviously some misinformation out there, and some providers' own biases that lead to it being difficult for LGBTQ patients to be honest and open and be able to really express what they really need. And if there's anyone on earth that you need to be absolutely honest with and be able to have a frank conversation without judgment, shame, or fear, it's your healthcare provider. They need to know everything. I'll give you another instance. I had a patient who was referred to me for refractory ulcerative proctitis. So they were diagnosed with ulcerative proctitis because they had a colonoscopy and their rectum was inflamed. And their doctor had them on all these high strength, like immunologic therapies, and they weren't responding. And he came to me for a second opinion. And the first question I asked him was, do you put anything in your butt? And he goes, absolutely. I'm a bottom and I haven't used a condom in 5 years. And I checked him for gonorrhea and he just had gonorrhea. He didn't even have ulcerative proctitis. So there's that lack of just simple questions about what you do with your sex life, even in a gastroenterologist's office where GI docs aren't always comfortable talking about sex. And that's got to change.
I couldn't agree more. That's actually exactly was my next point is we've really noticed similar issues in building the program and the initial resources. You may have seen or heard the stat that only 14% of gastroenterologists report routinely inquiring about sexual health for any patients with IBD, which is obviously a really important issue for patients, sexual health that is. And I feel like on top of that, we know that a lot of people can feel kind of a sense of shame associated to living with IBD when it comes to something like sex. And then in regard to LGBTQ plus IBD patients, there can be that sense of internalized shame for some folks about their sexuality or their identity and sex in general. So it's almost like a double or triply compounded issue for some LGBTQ plus IBD patients. And I was just wondering if you can talk about that challenge a little bit more.
Well, I think the biggest point that people forget about in our community is the vast majority, probably not as much in the lesbian community, but in the gay, bi, queer, trans community, a lot of us use our GI tract for our primary sexual organ. Anal sex is an incredibly important part of sex in the LGBTQ plus community. It's not the only thing we do. And not everybody who's gay has anal sex, but it's an important part of our lives. And if you have bloody diarrhea or diarrhea in general or rectal pain or abdominal pain, it's hard to proceed with having sex if that part of your system is messed up. So there's a lot of overlooking that part of our sexuality when it comes to IBD, and not just the conditions themselves, but often the treatments and the surgeries. Surgeries can dramatically affect your ability to have anal sex for the rest of your life. Not just in IBD even. Someone who has an anal fissure surgery or a hemorrhoidectomy, if they do a stapled hemorrhoidectomy, good luck trying to bottom again. If they do too much damage to the anal sphincter, good luck bottoming again. People with pouch surgeries all the time who have their colons completely removed and have part of their small intestine as their new rectum, nobody talks about sex with that. Nobody knows if it's safe to have sex in a rectal pouch. So I get asked all the time, what the hell do I do? My surgeon never talked about this. Am I able to have anal sex? How do I even start to explore that part of my life again? And so I try to give people an outlet to say, hey, listen, first of all, when it comes to IBD, if you're in a terrible flare, shelf the sex part until you can get some good relief or to get as close to remission as possible. Or at least do some alternate things, like maybe be a side rather than having penetration, just use oral sex as a way to have fun. So there's all these things out there that people just overlook when it comes to queer healthcare and IBD healthcare. You don't have to be LGBTQ to have Crohn's or colitis affect your sex life.
Yeah, totally. I mean, this conversation has me reflecting. I mentioned to you before I have Crohn's disease. I'm not a member of the LGBTQ community, but I'm thinking about how my GI has never asked me about sexual health. And I guess maybe that was just kind of, oh, the gynecologist will deal with that. And it's like kind of crazy that until this conversation, I didn't even realize that I hadn't discussed that ever. And I'm wondering, what advice do you have for questions that patients should bring up to their doctor if they want to get started with this conversation? You just gave such great tips for actually what you could practice at home, but how would you get the conversation started?
I think it's important to just be, like we talked about in the very beginning, it's important to be absolutely honest and open with your provider. Hey, this is me. This is what I plan on doing. This is what I'm interested in doing. I want to have an honest and frank conversation about the do's and don'ts. And if you're not comfortable with that, can you help me get to somebody who is comfortable with that so that I can have these frank conversations? You can say it in a nice way. It's not always going to be comfortable, but it's necessary.
What other suggestions do you have for making it safer and more acceptable for LGBTQ plus people living with IBD to speak about their conditions, whether it's to friends or family or in the doctor's office as well, just to, like you're saying, make sure they're getting the best treatment possible? What are other steps we could take?
I think finding providers that are known for being welcome and opening, talking to other queer people who have IBD is a great way to network. There are some support groups out there and some social chains out there through like Reddit and Instagram and other places like that where people do talk about things like this. And, if your provider just shuts down and just doesn't want to talk about it, it's probably time to change providers if that's possible. I mean, that's not always easy depending on where you are. GIs aren't always that easy to get into anymore. But ask around, talk about it, let people know how important it is. I think those are big steps.
I think you really hit the nail on the head, actually. I remember when I was younger, when I first started college, I was still going to my family general practitioner. And I think it was the first time that sex and gut health kind of came up. And I had questions and I could tell immediately that he was really uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And it made me very uncomfortable. And I wasn't totally out at that time either. So that made me even more uncomfortable. So I decided I've got to do something. And I think it took me a while to start asking some friends that I had made at college to kind of find a provider that I could feel more comfortable with. And I think everything that you said just really goes a long way to helping people in general feel like they have some power over there and some agency in their decision making. And I think in that regard, one of my questions is, what message would you like to send to LGBTQ plus people living with IBD who might be hesitant to share their experiences? Maybe it's something like through a survey, the survey that we're doing, or, something like that. Why is it important to make their voice heard through something like this, or friends and family in their lives?
Well, I think it's really, again, important to know that sex is something that society doesn't like to talk about across the board, especially here in the U.S. There's a fear of judgment and shame. No one talks about IBD and sex, it seems. But these tailored resources like you guys are about to provide for people with this survey highlight the needs of the community, make people feel like they're not alone, and help them to open up themselves and be able to share their own experiences. And when you get that courage, you can just be open and honest and represent the community and share your struggles, your disappointments, your hopes, and your dreams. I think it's crucial to help others learn specifically about your needs and about your struggles so that people will have an understanding of what other people go through. And it really helps get action on the importance of this topic. If we just sit there and just say, oh, yeah, it's tough to talk about, let's just not talk about it, let's not do anything, nothing's going to change. But these important things like you guys are doing, I think it's going to have a huge impact on educating providers, but also empowering patients.
Thanks for that, Dr. Carlton. And what you're doing is so important too. You mentioned it at the top, but I just wanted to highlight it again that you said that, people reach out to you over social media and that's free of charge. And I think having an outlet like that for people who maybe have a hard time affording health care or just, delay doctor's visits because of finances, to be able to provide what you do free of charge and give that support to people is tremendous. So thank you. And Adam, you had mentioned our survey. Where can our listeners find it? I'm sure we'll put a link in the show notes, but if you want to let us know.
Thanks, Zoe, and thanks, Dr. Carlton, too. It's super simple. Anyone looking to take our short 10-minute survey can find it at GHLF.org/LGBTQ-IBD-survey and click on the Take the Survey button. And just like you said, I know I said a mouthful. So for interested folks, the survey link is going to be in the show notes, so you can check it out much more easily and click it from there. Again, just like a huge thanks to you, Zoe, and to Dr. Carlton, especially for all of this incredible insight. It's really, really a privilege. So thanks.
Yeah, thanks so much, Dr. Carlton. It was great learning from you. And we'll also, of course, drop a link to your social media in the show notes so our listeners can find you.
Thank you.
Well, Adam, that was a really great conversation we had with Dr. Carlton, and Stephen and I always like to wrap up the show by sharing learnings. I can start by sharing that I was reminded in that story that Dr. Carlton said about the misdiagnosis with the STI, how important it is to talk to your doctor about your lifestyle and things going on in your life and be really clear about your symptoms because you want to get the best care that you can receive. How about you? What'd you learn today?
I couldn't agree more. I think Dr. Carlton gave us so many great learnings, and I think mine kind of goes along perfectly with yours. And it's that not only is a survey like ours important to help us create resources for other LGBTQ plus people living with IBD, but it's also for us to help all the providers out there too, so that they can get you the care and resources you need too, especially in this case for the LGBTQ plus community.
And listeners, we hope you learned something too. Thanks for listening to The Health Advocates, a podcast that breaks down major health news of the week to help you make sense of it all. If you like this episode, give us a rating, write a review, and hit that subscribe button wherever you listen. I'm Zoe Rothblatt.
And I'm Adam Kegley.
We'll see you next time.
Be inspired, supported, and empowered. This is the Global Healthy Living Foundation Podcast Network.